Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert, in the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast was made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety podcast. I'm Jim Seibert, along with Mike Bohan and Kenny Ray. We are glad that you are with us today. We got a pretty good topic today, rolling into the end of the year, talking about role models. And there's going to be a lot of reflection, hopefully, from our listeners that spawns some good thoughts and some maybe not so good memories, where role models have affected us in one way or another. And I just want to start this discussion off today with a description of role models, defined as a person whose behavior, example, or success serves as a model to be emulated by others, especially by younger people. And as I thought about that, I got into some books, did a little bit of Googling, and there was a quote by James Baldwin that really stuck out to me. I can't imagine it being any more true. Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they never failed to imitate them. As a father of two, that kind of stings a little bit, because our words can just be that. They can be words, and we can scold and we can chastise, but our actions are what our children and our subordinates can emulate. So think about that as we just open up some discussion here. I've got a couple different backgrounds, and the military aspect for over 20 years in active duty in the Guard. Role models were key to the development of me and the professional that I became in the military. And I would be remiss if I didn't say him by name. But Sergeant Eric Emblem, I remember the first time I showed up to the unit, he was the only guy there with a combat patch. And that combat patch is worn on the opposite sleeve of your unit patch, and it says, "I deployed with the unit." And this guy was old school, and he was in Desert Storm, and he was a tanker. And I remember that big red one on his sleeve, and he just, took me under the wing, taught me the ropes. And we also had a pretty great platoon sergeant by the name of Mike McCurley. Later on, as I went through officer candidate school, Captain Anderson became my first company commander. These men set a bar, a standard, and that bar never moved. And they held that standard in every action. And so they really rubbed off on me that you cannot sacrifice the standard or the mission goal for the sake of self-gain, for the sake of self-rest, for the sake of self-preservation. And as I transitioned out of college and in and out of the military, and then ended up in the Guard, my civilian job, I had a boss by the name of Johnny Barrett. And Johnny was the type of leader and mentor and role model that it almost made you sick when you made a mistake and you let him down. When I think of my role models and my leaders, the ones that have had the most lasting impact on me are the ones that gave me just enough rope for me to hang myself. But they were always there to pick you up at the end and ask about the lesson learned. And they leave a pit in your stomach when you feel like you let them down. With that, Mike, Kenny, role models have such a lasting impact on us. And Eric Emblem, that first sergeant I ever had, he gave me a challenge that I've had for now 30 years, that you're going to run into people, role models, leaders alike, whether it's your folks, whether it's from church, your youth leader, leaders in our industry now, all of us are human beings, and we've got our own vices, and we've got our own struggles, and we've got our own issues. And when we're up and comers, we're looking at these role models, and we've got bad habits and they've got bad habits. The challenge that was always posed to me was, Jim, you're inherently flawed already. You've already got your own bad habits. When you are taking example from those role models and leaders above you, leave their bad because you've already got your own, but take from them the good aspects, the good characteristics. Morph it into your own leadership philosophy and your own manhood. You guys got anything that reminds you of?
I think some of the things you're hitting on, Jim, my mind just rolling, because the first thing we're talking about role models is I go from my dad, and then I start thinking about my sons and those relationships. So when I think of role models, I think the first thing for me is, at least, this is the Mike Bohan definition, or at least part of it that I'll throw in there, is that relationship aspect. It's like, if I've got a role model in my life, there's a relationship there, and I'm looking at somebody that is living a life worth being imitated. It's not a position they've got necessarily. It may be, because oftentimes, just like you were talking about, Jim, it's a parent, it's a boss, it's a leader in our lives, but it's somebody that I've got a relationship with, and I'm looking at them and I'm saying, I want to be like that. That's what I want my life to look like. And just like you were talking about, Jim, I remember having conversations with my dad where he would say, don't make the mistakes I've made. Learn from me. And I don't know how many times I've said that to my boys. Hey, I'm trying to do the best I can to live a life as an example for you, but here's some mistakes I've made. Don't make these mistakes. You might make your own mistakes, but learn from me. And I think that's a huge part of role models. And I think we see that in the trucking industry. I think we see that because whether you want to go as far in your mind as I do when it comes to that relationship aspect, the trucking industry is very relational. It's a small world in the trucking industry, and we connect with a lot of different people. And, whether it's if you're a driver out there and you've got a manager or the owner of the company or your safety director, you're working in the office, maybe you're one of the dispatchers and you've got folks there. There's always someone in your life where you've got a connection to, a relationship with, where you say, that person has got some very good attributes and they're living a good life. And I want my life to imitate what they're doing and continue to grow on that. And guys, I do this with you guys. I mean, we're a brotherhood here on this podcast. We work together. We're colleagues. We're coworkers. But you guys, I respect the heck out of you, your role models, and there are things about your lives that I so deeply respect, and I want to imitate that. And I think that's just the way we should live life. And maybe I'm getting a little too off track, as far as, this is a trucking podcast and we're going to talk about trucking, but I'm a relationship guy. I feel like this is a relational topic. When we look at people, I think there are good and bad examples. And oftentimes I see people in the news where they say, this is a role model to this generation. And I'm thinking, I don't know about that. To me, it has to be somebody that's doing something that is bettering the world that they're living in. And that's a good role model. I mean, I've got, and sometimes it's not even an individual. I mean, we talked about this before, guys, when we were talking about this podcast and what we were going to do. And it may be an individual, but it also may be a company as a whole. I mean, there could be a company that has just fantastic culture and they are giving back to communities that they operate in, maybe where their home base is at or where their terminal's at. So I think this industry is just a good example of a lot of folks that are doing that. They're living that life where others can look at them and say, we're not just, hauling freight from point A to point B. We're going to do our best to give back to our communities to make this world a little bit better place. And but that's the thing for me. The first place I go to is those close relationships that I have with my dad, with my sons. And I think that's the mindset we've got to have when we're talking about role models.
Mike, I love the way you were talking about how relationships are so important in this overall discussion about role models. And all three of us are dads. And in a moment, I'm going to make some application of this principle to the trucking industry. But I want to share with y'all a real quick story. When my son was about 6 years old, and he's 38 now, so put that in perspective, I was his Cub Scout leader, me and two other dads. And we had, 12, 15 little boys, all of them 6, 7, 8 years old, first, second, third grade, somewhere along there. And one night for one of our projects, we had told them the week before, next week, all of y'all bring one of your dad's shoes. Whatever shoe you most relate your dad wearing. So if their dad was in a professional setting, they may have brought a dress shoe. If their dad was, a blue collar worker, they may have brought a steel toed boot. And I'm in Texas. Several of them brought cowboy boots, but all these little boys came to the Cub Scout meeting toting one of their dad's shoes or boots with them. And so we'd cut out these big pieces of paper, and we put their dad's shoe or boot down on a piece of paper, and we just took a mark slot and we drew the outline of that around it. And then we had these little boys take one of their shoes off, so they were barefooted, and stand on the profile of their dad's boot that we had just drawn. And then we traced their little foot on that. And then we let them all write on this piece of paper, be careful where you walk, Dad. I'm following in your footsteps. And I can't tell you over the following couple of weeks how many of the dads of those little boys came up to us and said, some of them kidding, but hey, man, you put a lot of pressure on me, because my wife taped that thing on the front of our refrigerator now. And every day when I walk in, I'm looking at it. But that's this whole idea of role models and the fact that not only are we emulating them, but the role model, the people that are in those positions got to understand they're being looked up to. And so for us in the trucking industry, there's, and Mike, you mentioned there's some motor carriers that in and of themselves, the company is a role model within our industry. And we're going to be careful not to name brands, but everybody listening to this, certain things are going to come to mind. They're going to say, oh, when I'm out driving down the interstate and I see that company's truck, I know, man, that's a good company. And I see other ones and they're not so good. So we even have motor carriers that are role models. But within a company itself, and I know we got a lot of drivers, we have a lot of owners, we have a lot of safety directors listening to our podcast. I want you to start thinking about who the role models are within the company and what makes them role models. Our national associations and our state trucking associations, most of them name or they have some sort of recognition each year for drivers. The ATA has America's Road Team, which is a group of professional drivers that really are ambassadors for our industry. And there's such a high standard to get selected to be a part of that group. We've all heard of the Highway Hero program that recognizes drivers that do outstanding things out here, helping people on the side of the road. Before I came to work for Marsh, I was a safety director at a large hazmat carrier, and we had certified driver trainers at each one of our 21 terminals. And those were the cream of the crop, not only in terms of were they good, safe truck drivers, professional truck drivers, but they had the respect of their peers. So that when they spoke, when they did something, when they set an example, if they coached somebody, it was always taken seriously because those men and women, we had female certified driver trainers as well, they were looked up to by their peers. Mike, I know you're active in the Missouri Trucking Association. I'm active in the Texas Trucking Association. We select a driver of the year every year for our entire state. And that man or woman gets special recognition at a special banquet, but then they go out the rest of the year and they set the example for other people. The company they work for puts some sort of special designation on the tractor. And even when they're going down the road, they're expected to be the role model. And again, for the safety directors and the owners, CEOs that listen to us, you guys and gals have constantly got to be setting the standard for the rest of your company, because that quote that Jim started with is not just applicable to our children. It's not that they just hear our words and are poor at doing that, but they'll always imitate our actions that's true for us as adults in the professional world too. If you've got a CEO or the owner of a company that does not buy into safety, shame on him or her. If they ever wonder why their subordinate employees are not buying in on safety, you've got to set that example. That's part of being a role model, is setting that bar like Jim was talking about, and then being committed, persevering, having tenacity, being accountable to do that all the time. And there's such a need for that in our industry. And kudos to the drivers, the safety directors, the CEOs that are serving as good role models. But we need more and more of that throughout our industry. And I hope that everybody listening to this podcast will think about who those role models are within their company, within their sphere of influence. And they'll keep supporting that whole idea, particularly for the safety directors and the owners that are on here. If you've got a driver that is a role model for the other drivers at your fleet, find a way to leverage that within your company, not in a manipulative way. I mean, go to that driver and to him or her and say, hey, the other drivers look up to you. Next time we have a safety meeting, would you be comfortable standing up and just sharing a few tips, or we're bringing on a new guy. Can you help show him the ropes? Start using that driver in a non-driving capacity and leverage that positional authority he has, that respect he has among the other drivers, and you'll see the impact on that on your entire operation. So, Jim, excellent job thinking about the military aspects, and then all of the stuff you were saying. I know Mike and I both were just sitting there saying, golly, that applies in the trucking industry too. And I can think of ways that all of that is applicable. So a great topic. Thank you for serving as our leader on this particular topic for role models.
Yeah, Kenny, when you had mentioned that activity that you did with your son and the boots and tracing their feet in that, it reminded me of grew up in northern Missouri and we hunted quail up here, and in the wintertime, unlike maybe what you guys had down there, we would always have snow up here. And I remember being a kid, a young kid, and wanting to go out hunting. I wanted to be with the guys. I wanted to be with Dad and his friends that were hunting, my older brother, and I remember those days when we'd be out and there'd be a lot of snow on the ground. And the easiest path for me was to just get right behind my dad and just walk in his footsteps, because he had broken down the snow for me already. And I think that's one of the things for role models out there is if you're listening to this, as Kenny was saying, if you're a driver, if you're a safety director or an owner of a company, to me, that's one of the things that a role model does. It's making a way that maybe it makes somebody else's path a little bit easier, whether it's a decision to make or whether it's just an idea that needs to be held within the company, whatever it is. It's kind of blazing a path. And one thing that Kenny hit on there that I wholeheartedly agree with, and I kind of wanted to point out, was he said, if you recognize that you have a driver that other drivers look up to, that's the key, because role models can't really put the crown on themselves and say, hey, I'm a role model. There's going to be people looking up to him, and it's going to be pretty easy to see that. If you're an owner of a company or a safety director, you're going to know who your role models are, because there's going to be other drivers. There's going to be other folks looking up to them. And I think that's something that then once you recognize, then you can go in there and support that person and what they're doing and encourage them to keep doing what they're doing, because there's a lot of folks looking up to them.
Mike, and Jim, I'm going to yield to you because I know we're getting ready to wrap up. But when I was a safety director at that trucking company, we had our own internal learning management system, our LMS, and we used some video, and some of it was commercially purchased. We would buy the video and then we'd use it for training for our drivers. And we did a lot of face-to-face training. But one thing we wanted to do, we wanted to create some in-house video. And we had 500 drivers, 21 terminals across the U.S. So we had the resources. We were big enough to justify doing that. And so our largest terminal, our most active terminal, was in Beaumont, Texas. And so I went down to the terminal manager down there, and I said, "Hey, we're thinking about doing some internal video, and we'll actually get a professional videographer, and the technology end of it will be sharp, but we don't want to hire an actor. We want one of our own drivers, and we want to do things like create a video that shows how to do a proper pre-trip." We were a tanker outfit, so we wanted to do things that, and Jim will appreciate this being an OSHA guy, we wanted ergonomic kind of stuff. How do you go up and down a ladder properly on a tank trailer? How do you properly pull a hose out of a hose rack? How do you hook up a pump and a PTO driven pump on a tractor? Things like that. And we wanted one of our own drivers to do it. And the terminal manager said, "Well, let me think about that." And so while he was thinking about it, it's a very active terminal, and there were a lot of drivers. And I just started asking drivers. I said, "Hey, if somebody was going to make a video, and it needed to be somebody that's personable, that's competent, that can do the job well, but also somebody people will pay attention to." And Mike, I kid you not, every driver I asked named the same name, the same guy.
Yep.
And I went to the terminal manager, and he said, "I'm still thinking about it." I said, "I don't care. Your guys just nominated our actor." And so I went to that driver that they had all named, and I pitched the idea at him. And he said, "Why are you coming to me?" And I said, "Because everybody at this terminal thinks you're the guy. You're the one."
Yeah, they're looking up to you.
He didn't even realize it. He had so much humility about him. But literally every driver I asked named the same guy. And we shot those videos, and he became a daggum rock star within our company. It was awesome.
That's awesome. Anyway, that is awesome.
Yeah, you're right. The role model cannot crown him or herself. It's done through peer recognition. The followers will recognize who their leaders are.
Yeah, that reminds me of just a military idea there, that if you think you're a leader, turn around and look behind you. If nobody's following you,
that's right.
you don't qualify. Gents, this was fun. It was good to reminisce and go back to some fond memories, and as current leaders and hopefully role models for others right now, and parents, might have made some of us just a little bit foggy-eyed, thinking about the responsibility that we owe to others. And it can be a weight. It can be a burden. It can feel heavy on the shoulders when we think people are always watching us. I've always got to be perfect. And those people below us, or alongside us, or watching us, they need to remember that, hey, we are humans, and our heroes and our role models, they're humans. And at times we can all fall short. In how we react when we fall short, when we are humble, when we are meek, when we own it, that is the difference. That's the example. That's part of it, is not always getting it right, but in how we react and how we bring others alongside us. Mike, you brought in companies as role models, and I just want to hit on that in closing here. If you're a company, if you're a transportation company that others are looking at, and you're recognized, you just got an opportunity. I think of a really great grain company that I worked for years ago. We had a program called strategic sourcing. And what we did is we looked at others that wanted to partner with us. And what we could do in that partnership was bring along their safety culture, set requirements for them to work with us, and coach them through the process to reach that standard that we would not move. And in so doing, we helped other companies in their safety culture. We helped other companies in their profitability. And all we did was say, we're going to be a role model. We're going to share our best practices with you, because when we can unify as an industry or a sector of an industry, the regulatory agencies that are out there see us come along professionally, and it benefits the whole. Wanted to leave you all with that thought. I greatly appreciate your time. I know that for Mike and Kenny and I, we look forward to these opportunities where we can just get together and visit about a topic that we're passionate about. We really thank you for coming along on this journey. So for Mike and Kenny, thanks for joining us on Driving the Line, the podcast that's always in the pursuit of safety. Until next time.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the Pursuit of Safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.